The last message Jiyeon sent her roommate was a lie. Studying at the library. Be back late. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March, and she wasn't going to any library. She was going to meet him. The man who had promised her everything she needed to stay in America. The man whose real name she didn't even know. By midnight, Jiyeon would be dead, her body found in a luxury apartment in Midtown Manhattan, and the man she trusted would vanish like smoke, leaving behind only questions and a trail of carefully constructed deceptions that would take investigators months to unravel. Jiyeon Park arrived in New York City on a cold January morning with 2 suitcases, a student visa, and a dream that felt both thrilling and terrifying. At 19, she was younger than most of her classmates at the Fashion Institute of Technology, but she had worked for this moment her entire life. Back in Seoul, her parents ran a small convenience store in Gangnam, scraping together every one they could spare to send their only daughter to America. The weight of their sacrifice pressed against her chest every morning when she woke up in the cramped studio apartment she shared with 2 other Korean students in Flushing, Queens. The apartment smelled like kimchi and instant noodles, and the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing in Mandarin at 3 in the morning. But it was hers. It was America. It was possibility. She was a good student. Quiet, diligent, always sitting in the front row of her design classes, taking notes in a careful mixture of English and Korean. Her professors noticed her talent immediately, the way she could sketch a garment and make it feel alive on the page, full of movement and emotion. But talent didn't pay rent. The apartment cost $1,200 a month, split 3 ways. Her parents sent what they could, but it wasn't enough. Jiyeon worked weekend shifts at a Korean barbecue restaurant in Koreatown, coming home smelling like smoke and meat, her fingers raw from washing dishes when the restaurant got busy. She calculated her expenses obsessively in a small notebook. Rent, food, subway fare, art supplies. The numbers never balanced. Every month, she fell a little further behind, and the guilt of asking her parents for more money made her physically ill. She didn't talk about the stress with anyone, not her roommates, who had their own struggles, not her parents, who called every Sunday expecting to hear that their daughter was thriving, certainly not her classmates, most of whom seemed to glide through life with credit cards and weekend trips to the Hamptons. Jiyeon smiled and nodded and kept her panic private, locked behind her careful English and her perpetually polite demeanor. But the panic was there, growing larger every day, a knot in her stomach that never quite loosened. It was February when she first saw the ad. She was scrolling through her phone during a late-night subway ride back from the restaurant, exhausted and half asleep, when the sponsored post appeared in her feed. Seeking arrangement. Generous benefactor looking for intelligent, ambitious young woman. Financial support for school and living expenses. Discretion required. The profile picture showed a well-dressed man in his 40s, his face partially obscured by shadow. No name, just a username, Manhattan philanthropist. She scrolled past it, then scrolled back. Read it again. Felt something like shame and something like hope twist together in her chest. She told herself it was just curiosity when she clicked on the profile. Just research. She wasn't actually going to respond, but she read through the description carefully. He claimed to be a successful businessman, divorced, with a passion for supporting young talent. He wasn't looking for anything inappropriate, the profile insisted. Just companionship. Conversation. Someone intelligent to share dinners with, attend events with. In exchange, he offered financial assistance. The word arrangement felt both vague and specific, dancing around what it really meant. Jiyeon knew what it meant. She wasn't naive, but she was desperate, and desperation has a way of making the unthinkable seem almost reasonable. She created a profile that night, used a photo from her Instagram where she looked pretty but not too provocative, wrote a brief bio about being a fashion student from Korea. Her finger hovered over the send button for nearly 10 minutes before she pressed it. Then she closed the app and tried to forget about it, even as her heart hammered in her chest. He messaged her the next morning. Jiyeon, beautiful name for a beautiful girl. I'd love to learn more about you. His messages were polite, articulate, with none of the crude directness she had feared. He asked about her studies, her dreams, what brought her to New York. He told her his name was David, that he worked in finance, that he had been married once, but his ex-wife had taken everything in the divorce except his ability to work hard. He said he saw something special in her, something that reminded him of his own daughter, who was studying abroad in London. The daughter detail made Jiyeon relax slightly. A man with a daughter wouldn't be dangerous, she reasoned. A father understood. They messaged for a week before he suggested meeting for coffee. Somewhere public, he emphasized. I want you to feel completely safe. They met at a Starbucks near Columbus Circle on a Saturday afternoon. Jiyeon wore her best jeans and a simple sweater, nervous enough that she arrived 20 minutes early and sat at a corner table, watching every man who entered. When David finally appeared, he looked exactly like his photos, which itself was a relief. Mid-40s, tall, well-groomed, wearing an expensive coat and a kind smile. He ordered them both coffee and asked her questions about her life with what seemed like genuine interest. He didn't touch her, didn't make any inappropriate comments, just talked to her like she was a person worth knowing. At the end of the hour, he handed her an envelope. "For your expenses this month," he said quietly. "No strings attached. I just want to help." Jiyeon opened it later on the subway. Inside were $300 bills, $3,000, more than she made in 2 months at the restaurant. She stared at the money until her hands started shaking, and then she put it in her bag and tried to process what had just happened. He texted her that evening. "I hope that helps. I'd like to see you again if you're comfortable with that." She responded yes before she could overthink it. The second meeting was dinner at a nice Italian restaurant in the West Village. David ordered wine and told her stories about his work, his travels, his failed marriage. He was charming and self-deprecating, and Jiyeon found herself laughing more than she had in months. When he asked about her family, she found herself telling him the truth, about her parents' sacrifice, about the pressure she felt, about the constant fear of failing and having to go home. He listened with such attention, such apparent empathy, that it felt like confession, like relief. At the end of the night, he gave her another envelope. "You deserve to focus on your art, not worry about money," he said. This time, there were $400 bills inside. Over the next month, they fell into a pattern. They met once or twice a week, always for dinner or coffee, always in nice restaurants where David seemed to know the staff. He was generous, not just with money, but with advice, connections, encouragement. He introduced her to a gallery owner in Chelsea who looked at her portfolio and seemed genuinely impressed. He took her shopping for art supplies at a professional store in Soho, insisting she get the good materials she needed. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since arriving in America. And yes, there was always money, sometimes in an envelope, sometimes transferred to her bank account. Enough that she quit her restaurant job and could focus on her studies. Enough that she stopped having to lie to her parents about how well she was doing. Her roommate noticed the change. "You're going out a lot," Mina observed one night, watching Jiyeon get ready for another dinner. "New boyfriend?" Jiyeon laughed it off. "Just a mentor, someone helping with my career." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. She didn't tell Mina about the money. Didn't tell anyone. David had asked her to keep their arrangement private, and she understood why. People wouldn't understand. They would judge. They would call it something ugly when it felt, most of the time, almost innocent. But things were changing. Slowly at first, then faster. David started texting her more frequently. Good morning messages, late-night check-ins, photos of things that reminded him of her. The tone was shifting from mentor to something more possessive, though Jiyeon couldn't quite articulate how. He began suggesting they meet at his apartment instead of restaurants. "More private," he explained. "We can talk freely." The first time she went, the apartment stunned her. It was in a luxury building in Midtown, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. David poured her wine and they sat on his leather couch and talked, and it felt sophisticated and adult and only slightly uncomfortable. The second time she visited his apartment, he kissed her. Not forcefully, but deliberately, as if it were the natural next step in whatever this was. Jiyeon froze for a moment, then kissed him back because she didn't know what else to do. Because saying no might mean losing everything he was giving her. Because some part of her had known this was always going to be expected, even if neither of them had said it out loud. Afterward, David held her and said, "I care about you so much, Jiyeon. You're so special." And she said, "I care about you too," because it seemed like the script required it, even though what she really felt was confusion and a creeping sense of having crossed a line she couldn't uncross. After that night, their relationship changed completely. David expected her to visit his apartment regularly, expected physical intimacy. The envelopes of cash came after each visit now, handed to her as she left, which made the transaction feel more explicit and somehow dirtier. Jiyeon told herself it was fine, that consenting adults could have whatever arrangement they wanted, that she was in control. But she noticed David was becoming more possessive. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with. He texted constantly and got irritated if she didn't respond quickly. "I'm supporting you," he reminded her once when she canceled a meeting to study for an exam. "I think I deserve your time." Mina confronted her in March. You're seeing that older guy, aren't you? The one who's been giving you money. Jiyeon's face must have confirmed it because Mina's expression shifted to concern. Jiyeon, this isn't safe. You don't really know this person. But Jiyeon defended David. He was kind. He was helping her. Mina didn't understand. Nobody understood. And besides, what choice did she have? Go back to washing dishes? Call her parents and admit she couldn't make it? The pride wouldn't let her. The shame wouldn't let her. So she kept seeing David and tried to ignore the growing unease in her gut. David's behavior grew stranger. He became obsessed with the idea that Jiyeon might be seeing other men. He checked her phone once while she was in the bathroom. He asked invasive questions about her male classmates. One night, after drinking too much wine, he grabbed her wrist hard enough to hurt and said, "You belong to me. I've paid for you. Don't forget that." Jiyeon pulled away, frightened by the sudden violence in his voice, but David immediately apologized, said he was stressed about work, said he loved her too much. The word love scared her more than the grip on her wrist. This wasn't love. She knew what this was. But she was in too deep now. The money had become her lifeline, and David knew it. She tried to pull away, started making excuses about being too busy to meet. David's texts became more frequent, more demanding. "I need to see you, tonight." When she said no, he sent her a long message about how disappointed he was, how much he had done for her, how ungrateful she was being. Then, almost immediately, another message. "I'm sorry. I miss you. Please don't abandon me." The emotional whiplash was exhausting. Jiyeon felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of obligation and fear. She confided in a classmate, an American girl named Sarah, who immediately told her to go to the police. But what would she tell them? That a man was giving her money in exchange for sex. That was illegal, wasn't it? Prostitution? The shame of that word made her feel physically sick. On that Thursday in March, David sent her a text at 8 p.m. "Come over tonight. We need to talk. It's important." There was something final in the message that frightened her. Jiyeon thought about saying no, thought about blocking his number, and never looking back. But she also thought about the $6,000 he had transferred to her account just last week, about the rent due in 5 days, about the web of dependency he had so carefully constructed around her. So she lied to her roommate about the library and got on the subway to Manhattan. The apartment was different that night, too quiet. The lights were dimmed low, and there was music playing softly from somewhere. David was drinking scotch when she arrived, and his eyes had a strange intensity that made her want to turn around and leave. "Sit down," he said, not gently. Jiyeon sat on the edge of the couch, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. David paced for a moment, then turned to her. "You've been avoiding me. I know you have, after everything I've done for you." His voice was tight with something that sounded like rage barely contained. Jiyeon started to respond, to placate, but David cut her off. "I love you. Do you understand that? I love you, and you're treating me like I'm just some wallet to you." The irony of that statement would have been funny if Jiyeon weren't so scared. She stood up. "I think I should go." David moved faster than she expected, stepping between her and the door. "No, we're not done talking." His hand reached out, grabbed her arm, not violently, but firmly, a warning. Jiyeon's heart was pounding now, her breath coming too fast. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but where? He was blocking the door. The apartment was on the 32nd floor. She tried to keep her voice steady. "David, please, you're scaring me." What happened next would later be debated by lawyers and psychologists and internet commenters, picked apart and reconstructed from forensic evidence and text message records. But in that moment, it was just chaos. David's grip tightened. Jiyeon pulled away hard, her purse falling to the floor. There was shouting, though later no one could agree on who shouted what. Neighbors would report hearing a woman's scream, cut short. The physical struggle lasted less than 2 minutes. David was bigger, stronger, and fueled by something dark and wounded in his psyche. Jiyeon fought. Her DNA would later be found under her fingernails, along with David's skin cells. But fighting wasn't enough. The medical examiner would later determine that Jiyeon died from strangulation, with blunt force trauma to the head consistent with being struck against a hard surface. The back of her skull had connected with the corner of David's glass coffee table. Whether he meant to kill her or whether it was the panicked escalation of a violent man losing control, no one would ever know for certain. What was certain was that by 11:30 p.m., Jiyeon Park was dead on the floor of a luxury apartment in Midtown Manhattan, her phone still in her purse, the last message to her roommate still glowing on the screen. "Be back late." David's real name was Michael Chen. He was 43 years old, a mid-level financial analyst at a hedge fund, divorced with no daughter in London. That entire story was fabrication. The apartment wasn't his either. He had been subletting it from a colleague who was working overseas. Nearly everything he had told Jiyeon was a lie, carefully constructed to create trust and dependency. And she was not the first young woman he had contacted through that website. Police would later find messages to 17 other women, all Korean or Chinese international students, all approached with the same script about mentorship and support. Most had not responded. 3 had met him once and never again. Jiyeon had been the one who stayed, who had needed the money badly enough to ignore the warning signs that now seemed so obvious in hindsight. The investigation moved quickly once Jiyeon's roommate reported her missing the next morning. Jiyeon's phone records led police to the apartment building. Security footage showed her entering at 10:02 p.m. and never leaving. When police knocked on the apartment door that Friday afternoon, there was no answer. They obtained a warrant by evening and found Jiyeon's body wrapped in a bedsheet in the bathroom, Michael Chen long gone. He had fled sometime in the early morning hours, caught on camera leaving the building at 4:47 a.m. with a suitcase and a backpack. The manhunt lasted 11 days. Michael Chen had withdrawn all his money from his bank accounts and destroyed his phone, but he made the amateur mistake of using his credit card at a gas station in Pennsylvania. Police tracked him to a motel outside Pittsburgh, where he was arrested without incident. He sat silently in the interrogation room for 3 hours before finally asking for a lawyer. He never confessed, never showed remorse. His defense attorney would later try to argue that Jiyeon's death was accidental, the result of a domestic dispute, painting her as a willing participant in an affair that had turned toxic. The prosecution told a different story, one of predation and calculated manipulation, of a man who had used his resources to exploit a vulnerable young woman and then killed her when she tried to break free. Jiyeon's parents flew to New York 3 days after her body was found. Her mother collapsed in the airport when she saw the news cameras, her father's face a mask of destroyed dignity. They didn't understand why their daughter had been in that apartment, why she had been involved with this man. The police explained about the sugar daddy website, the money transfers, the messages. Jiyeon's mother kept saying, "She was a good girl, she was a good girl," as if goodness could have protected her daughter from desperation, from the impossible mathematics of being young and foreign and poor in one of the most expensive cities in the world. The trial was held that October. Michael Chen was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Jiyeon's parents sat in the front row every day of the trial, their grief a palpable presence in the courtroom. They had learned things about their daughter's final months that broke them in ways the death itself hadn't. They had learned that she had been suffering, had been trapped, had been too ashamed or too proud or too scared to ask them for help. They had learned that the cheerful Sunday phone calls where Jiyeon told them everything was wonderful had been performances, her actual life, a desperate scramble she had hidden from everyone who loved her. The case sparked a brief media frenzy about sugar daddy websites and the exploitation of international students. Think pieces were written, experts were interviewed. There were calls for regulation, for better support systems, for awareness. But the outrage faded, as outrage always does, absorbed back into the endless churn of news and tragedy. Within months, Jiyeon Park became just another cautionary tale, her name invoked by parents warning their daughters and by advocates pushing for policy changes. The website where Michael Chen had found her changed its terms of service but remained operational. The fundamental dynamics that had made Jiyeon vulnerable, poverty and immigration status, and the impossible cost of ambition, remained unchanged. Mina, Jiyeon's roommate, dropped out of FIT the following semester and went back to Korea. She couldn't stay in the apartment where Jiyeon's bed remained empty, where Jiyeon's art supplies still sat on the desk, where every corner held memories of her friend. She told a reporter, months later, that she felt guilty for not doing more, for not forcing Jiyeon to stop seeing David, for not calling the police herself. The reporter wrote that Mina was haunted by what-ifs, but Mina knew better. The what-ifs didn't change anything. Jiyeon was still dead. Michael Chen would still spend decades in prison. The tragedy had still happened, as inevitable as it felt random. Jiyeon's parents held a memorial service in Seoul, attended by hundreds of people who had known her in Korea. Her high school teacher spoke about her talent and determination. Her childhood friends shared memories of a girl who had always dreamed bigger than her circumstances. Her parents buried an empty casket because they couldn't afford to transport her body back to Korea. They created a small scholarship in her name for young Korean women studying art, though the fund never grew very large. They tried to find meaning in their daughter's death, tried to believe that some good could come from such senseless loss. But mostly they just grieved, their lives permanently split into before and after, into the daughter they had raised and the daughter they had failed to save. In the end, what killed Jiyeon Park wasn't Michael Chen's hands around her throat, though those hands were the physical instrument. What killed her was a system that made her vulnerable in the first place, the impossible cost of education, the visa requirements that limited her work options, the shame that kept her from asking for help, the website that connected desperate young women with predatory men and called it entrepreneurship, the cultural pressures that valued success at any cost, the loneliness of being young and foreign in a city that could be stunningly indifferent to suffering. Michael Chen was a monster, but he was a monster that the circumstances had allowed to exist, to hunt, to find victims who had no good choices. There's a photograph of Jiyeon that appeared in most of the news coverage, taken on her last day in Seoul before she flew to New York. She's standing in front of Incheon Airport wearing a backpack and a nervous smile, her whole life ahead of her, possibility and promise written across her young face. Her parents look at that photograph sometimes and try to remember what hope felt like, try to remember their daughter before New York, before money became synonymous with survival, before she met a man who saw her desperation and decided to exploit it. In the photograph, she's 19 years old and untouched by tragedy. She's their daughter, brilliant and ambitious, about to chase her dreams in America. She would be dead in 6 weeks. The library she texted about that final night would remain unvisited. The dreams she carried would remain unfulfilled. And somewhere in a prison upstate, Michael Chen would sleep in a cell, still maintaining he had done nothing wrong, still unable to see the young woman he had killed as anything more than a transaction that had ended badly. Some people are like that. They move through the world breaking things and never understand the magnitude of what they've destroyed. Jiyeon's story is not unique. There are other young women, other countries, other apartments where desperation meets predation and ends in violence. The names change, but the structure remains the same. Trust offered by those who should never be trusted. Money exchanged for safety that never really existed. Victims blamed for their own victimization. And always, the people left behind asking why, as if why could change what happened, as if understanding could restore what was lost. The last text message Jiyeon sent was a lie. But in a way, it was also true. She was studying that night, learning a lesson she would never get to share. That some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. That desperation makes poor decisions seem reasonable until it's too late. That the price of survival can sometimes be life itself. These are lessons no 19-year-old should have to learn, especially not in the back of a stranger's apartment, far from home, with no one coming to help. But Jiyeon learned them anyway, in those final terrifying moments, when the man she had trusted revealed himself to be something else entirely, and there was nowhere left to run. She learned them, and then she died. And the city that had promised her everything gave her nothing but a grave she would never occupy, and a story that would be told and forgotten and told again. A cautionary tale in the endless catalog of young women who reached for their dreams and found nightmare. Death instead.